long before bone, before lungs, before the first breath on land. The world belonged to water. For millions of years, Earth was silent above the waves. But below, life stirred, flexed, reached. And then, in the shallows of a forgotten sea, something changed. Fins grew curious, gills gasped for air, and life, ancient, armored, and half-aware, began to rise from the sea and walk. Not with intention, not with pride, but with instinct, with need, and with fate. This is not just the story of a fish. It's the story of every step that followed. At the Lost World Files, we don't just tell ancient stories. We excavate them from fossil to fire, from shadow to stride. This is the first. In the shadows of a lost sea, they learn to walk. There are places on this earth that no longer remember themselves. No echo of wind, no tide to polish the rocks, no seabird's cry to tell the story. Just silence. A silence so wide, so ancient, it feels like the breath before creation. And buried in that stillness, footprints. Not of birds, not of fish, not of the creatures we know today, but of something in between. Something standing on the trembling edge between water and land, between what once swam and what dared to walk. Beneath the dust of vanished oceans, we find their memory pressed into stone. Not as bones, not as shadows, but as steps. As if time itself had paused and the earth in a brief act of mercy remembered. But who were they? What made them rise not just onto legs, but into something entirely new? How do you learn to walk in a world that has never seen walking? How do you leave the comfort of the sea, its rhythms, its weightlessness, and face the dry, uncertain world of gravity? And why? Why leave the cradle of a billion years? Why trade fins for fragile limbs? These are not questions of biology alone. They are the questions of us, of what it means to become something you were not meant to be. When we speak of the first steps, we often think of a child wobbling forward into the arms of someone waiting. But these first steps were taken with no arms waiting, no voice cheering, only the wind, only the mud, only the long gaze of time watching. Somewhere in what is now a desert, a creature pulled itself forward, its tail dragging, its ribs heaving, its eyes tasting air like a foreign language. And the land, soft and silent, recorded it all. A sacred transcription written not in ink, but in the press of flesh against earth. You can still visit them, these ghost trails, in the cliffs of Poland, in the limestone beds of Nova Scotia, in the whispering rocks of Greenland and Nevada. The tracks are small, most only a few inches across, but they hold a weight that bends the air around them. They speak not just of a moment, but of a turning point in the great poem of life. Because before the forests, before the dinosaurs, before birds filled the skies and mammals learned fire, something crawled out of the sea, and the world changed forever. Close your eyes and let's go back. Back to a time before memory, before continents had names, before anything had ever dared to rise from the waves and stay dry. Let us return to the shadows of a lost sea and walk. Now, breathe in slowly. Let the salt cling to your throat. Let the sky press low. The world as it was 390 million years ago is unfamiliar yet alive, in the bones of everything that came after. We call this age the Devonian, but it had no name back then. Just endless green tides and warm, shallow seas stretched like mirrors beneath a molten sky. The land was mostly barren, silent, save for the whisper of early mosses and strange trunkless ferns clawing at the air. No birds, no mammals, no flowers. just the breath of ancient winds and the soft creak of things beginning to grow. And below, beneath the surface of that forgotten sea, life bloomed in dazzling violent forms. Jawless fish drifted like armored whispers. Others bore spines, teeth, armor-plated heads. Some were small as pebbles, some larger than a man. It was a kingdom of swimmers of lungs, still unborn. But deep in the mud, hidden between reeds and rocks, a different kind of creature stirred. It looked like a fish, because it was, but not like the others. This one had lungs. It had bones in its fins, primitive fingers waiting for a purpose. It could breathe in water, and when necessary, it could rise, gulp air, and live briefly on the edge. This was not conquest, not ambition. It was survival. You see, the seas of the Devonian were not always kind. Droughts would come, waters would evaporate into sky, tide pools would shrink to pockets of gasping death. And the creatures who could move, even just a little, even just for a while, had a chance. A chance to leave one drying pool and crawl toward another. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't heroic. It was desperate. It was slow. It was miraculous. Over time, what was once just movement became direction, then decision, then change. The bones in the fin grew stronger, more jointed. The tail, once a master of balance in the sea, became an anchor on land. Eyes shifted upward, trading the murk of the deep for the blinding clarity of air. The body reshaped itself, not overnight, not in 1,000 years. But step by trembling step, life began to learn how to walk. And in doing so, it rewrote the story of this planet. Because without that moment, without that desperate crawl through the mud, there would be no footprints. No forests, no predators stalking the hills, no mothers giving birth in caves, no fires, no flight, no cities, no poems, no you. This is why it matters. This is why we listen to stones. Because inside their silence they carry the echoes of beginnings of risk and rupture of strange soft things, daring to push forward into a world that had never invited them in. The fossil record is not a photograph. It is a memory whispered through time. It is incomplete, selective, blurred by pressure, by erosion, by chance. But even with its missing pieces, it offers us glimpses, as if the earth itself sometimes forgets how good it is at hiding. We find rocks with bones inside, fins with wrists, pelvises that no longer support swimming. We find trails, not of confident strides, but of creatures dragging bellies' toes, scraping into soft, wet sand. And in those trails, those ancient, quiet paths, we see not just anatomy. We see decision. We see fear, hope, and something else. The first breath of a dream that hadn't yet learned its name. Come closer now. Let the tide fall away. Let the land swell upward, not as it is today, but as it once was, a mosaic of inland seas, braided rivers, and warm lagoons. The bones we seek were never meant to survive. Flesh decays, mud buries, stone forgets, and yet somehow they remained. Cradled in shale and sandstone in the beds of rivers that once meandered through ancient continents, they waited. For millions of years they waited. Until someone half hopeful, half lost, brushed away the dust and saw a shape that did not belong to any fish, nor to any lizard. A shape in between. Let us begin in the Canadian Arctic, on a wind-scraped island called Ellesmere, where the ground thaws for only weeks. Each year, a team of paleontologists chipped away at Devonian stone and uncovered something extraordinary. A skull. flattened, broad, with eyes perched high like a crocodile's, and just beneath it, bones. Not fins. Bones. A humerus, a radius, a wrist, even rudimentary digits. This was no ordinary fish. They called it tiktaalik, roughly translated large freshwater fish in Inuktitut. But it was far more than that. Tiktaalik was a bridge, not metaphorically, but anatomically. It had gills and lungs, scales and a neck. It could prop itself up with forelimbs and lift its head to look around. Its body was built for the water, but its gaze belonged to the land. It was 375 million years old, and in that frozen place, where nothing seemed alive, the bones of this half-fish, half-walker breathed life into our understanding of how movement began. But Tiktaalik was not alone. Thousands of miles away in the Polish village of Zakelmi, geologists searching for ancient tidal rocks found something older than Tiktaalik and stranger still. Not bones, but footprints. Clear, unmistakable impressions pressed into limestone. Toes, heels, drag marks. A creature walking, not swimming, across soft coastal mud. But the date 390 million years ago. 15 million years before Tiktaalik. It was as if we'd found the footprints before we found the feet. And suddenly our timeline cracked open. Perhaps walking didn't begin with one species. Perhaps it was not a single leap, but a scattered migration of attempts, some successful, many lost. In Scotland, on the cliffs of Caithness, scientists discovered another piece of the puzzle, Elginurpaton, a tetrapod so ancient its limbs barely understood their purpose. With a narrow jaw and limbs built less for walking and more for struggling through dense, marshy reeds, Elginurpaton was no champion of evolution. But it was trying. It was trying to leave the water, trying to become something else. And in those crude, clumsy limbs, we see courage, not the human kind, but the evolutionary kind. The kind written not in choices, but in mutations, in failures, in generations that never knew they were part of something bigger. Fossils are not dead things. They are conversations held across the gulfs of time. They tell us about the Earth's bones, yes, but also about its moods, its floods, its fires, its silences. To read them, we must learn the language of stone, how layers compress, how ash becomes time, how tiny glinting bones can reveal entire lost coastlines. We study the shape of joints, the angle of muscle attachment, the density of bone interiors. We compare wrist bones in extinct lobe-finned fish to the wrist of a newt, a salamander, a child. And the echoes align. As if buried deep inside our own hands, there is still a memory of water, of a time when our fingers were once fins. And yet, every answer leads to a question. Why did these creatures leave the water at all? Some say it was drought. Others suggest food insects beginning to colonize the land. Still others believe it was a matter of space, of escaping predators, of exploring silence where no one else yet roamed. Perhaps it was all of these. Perhaps it was none, because evolution does not think. It only tries. It only folds and bends and molds until something unexpected, like legs, appears. The earth is not stable. It breathes, it shifts. It breaks and remakes itself, sometimes gently, sometimes with violence. To understand how walking began, we must also understand the ground beneath it, and how that ground rose, fell, and moved across time. Back in the Devonian, what we now call continents were arranged differently. Laurentia, Gondwana, Baltica. These were not names anyone spoke, but drifting plates, restless colliding. The seas between them were warm, shallow, and rich in life. But they were also temporary. As continents buckled and folded, land rose where water once ruled. Estuaries dried. Lagoons became mudflats. And then, silence. A creature stranded by tide or drought would have found itself on unfamiliar ground, sinking with each breath, its gills drying, its body panicking. And in that desperation, somewhere in a marsh now turned to stone, it would push. And the land would remember. It would leave behind a mark, not of dominance, but of survival. And we, millions of years later, would crouch down beside that mark, brush away the sand, and find ourselves staring at the first page of our own story. Sometimes what we find are not bones or tracks, but the spaces where they once were. Ghosts in rock. Hollows where bone dissolved, leaving only a negative impression. A mold of absence. Like memory itself, not always reliable, but still full of meaning. In Greenland, researchers discovered fragments of an ancient tetrapod called Ichthyostega. Its limbs were more defined with digits, elbows, knees. It had lungs and ears better tuned for air than water. Yet its tail still resembled that of a fish. It could move across land awkwardly, painfully. But it could also swim. It was caught in transition. Not quite one thing, not yet another. We call this transitional form. But that phrase, clinical as it sounds, doesn't capture the strangeness of it. These weren't prototypes. They were lives. Full, complex lives that knew hunger, fear, shelter breath. They weren't evolving toward us. They were simply adapting to the world as it unfolded around them. What came after was never the plan. It was only the consequence. Now, look at your own hand. Stretch it slowly. Flex each finger. Inside those bones are echoes. Your humerus, once the swimming lever of lobe-finned fish. Your wrist built from bones, first tested in a forgotten marsh. Your digits numbered like those in Tiktaalik in Acanthostega, in the deep ancestral murk. We do not carry their blood, but we carry their solutions. The earth rewards what works, and what worked once was the ability to move between two worlds. That ability, tentative, fragile, would one day build cities, but it started as nothing more than a struggle to breathe. There's something almost reverent in the way paleontologists speak of these creatures. They are not just specimens. They are ancestors. Not of humans specifically, but of all who walk the land. Every deer, every lizard, every bird that struts across a branch owes something to these strange fin-legged pioneers. Even the elephants, even the wolves, even you on your evening walk feeling gravel underfoot. All of it a continuation of one improbable experiment. A fish that learned to walk. Somewhere near the edge of what is now Pennsylvania, there once flowed a braided river whose currents carried sediment from distant rising mountains, mountains born from tectonic collisions so deep in time they have long since worn to hills. It was here in the silted cradle of this river that a creature called Hynerpeton left its trace. Hynerpeton was no graceful animal. Its body was thick, its limbs powerful, its ribs wide and sturdy, a chest built for breathing air rather than filtering water. And here's the marvel, Hynerpeton's shoulder girdle was not connected to its skull, unlike in fish. It had a neck. A simple thing, perhaps. But the ability to move your head independently of your body, to scan the world, to pause to look, is an enormous evolutionary leap. It meant this creature could brace itself on land without crushing its own airway. It could raise its chest, arch its back, support its own weight. It meant it could walk. Not gracefully, not far, but it could. And that in the Devonian was enough. You might think of evolution as a ladder, each step building towards something higher, better, more complex, but that's not how it works. Evolution is not a ladder. It is a tree. A vast, knotted branching tree where every split leads somewhere new. Most branches go nowhere. They wither. They vanish. They are swallowed by extinction, by fire, by flood, by the blind chance of who survives and who does not. But some branches keep reaching. And what we find in the fossil record are those brief places where the branch paused, where it thickened, where something strange and almost impossible held on long enough to leave a mark. Imagine the edge of an ancient lagoon. The air is thick with moisture. Insects, strange, enormous things, with wings like parchment, flutter through ferns. A creature hauls itself from the shallows. Its belly scrapes the mud. Its legs splay awkwardly. It pauses to breathe. This moment, utterly mundane in its time, is everything. Because it is movement, because it is risk, because it is change. Every creature that followed from dinosaurs to songbirds, from saber-toothed cats to shepherd dogs, carries the memory of that moment whether it knows it or not. Even us. Even now. Look again at the limbs of the earliest tetrapods. Their upper arms were strong and short. Their elbows bent downward. Their wrists bent forward. And their fingers splayed outward, pressing into soft, uneven ground. This configuration still exists. In amphibians, in reptiles, even in your cat stretching on the windowsill. Bones, remember. Not in the way minds do, but in shape, in function, in the habits that survive time. As the Devonian drew to a close, something quiet and terrifying occurred. A mass extinction. The seas changed, oxygen dropped, entire ecosystems collapsed. And many of the fish that once dominated the waters, the armored placoderms, the swift sharks, the bottom-feeding giants, disappeared. But the air breathers, the ones who had begun to move inland to feed on insects, to nest in ferns and beneath driftwood, they endured. They inherited a quieter world. One with space, one with light filtering through canopy, one where the water no longer ruled alone. And so they spread. Their limbs grew stronger, their lungs more efficient. Some returned to the water like amphibians, some stayed on land, some climbed trees, some soared. Some would one day write poems, build telescopes, and whisper to bones in the dark. The sea grew quiet. And in its retreat, the land took a breath. Now we step into the Carboniferous period, roughly 360 million years ago. The air thickens with humidity. The oxygen content is higher than at almost any point in Earth's history. And the forests, oh, the forests. Towering club mosses, ferns, and seedless trees rose like green cathedrals across the continent. Vast swamps stretched for thousands of miles. Their trunks were hollow, their roots shallow, their canopy layered and strange. This was not the world of mammals, not yet. But it was a world made for walking, and walk they did. From the margins of the swamps, the descendants of those first bold crawlers began to change again. No longer just creatures of transition, they became specialists. Some grew sleek with longer limbs, built to move faster across tangled forest floors. Others became stout and low, pressing their bellies to the moist ground as they foraged for worms, insects, or something else that moved in the dark. But it was here amid the wet leaves and decaying wood that one change rewrote the future yet again. The egg, not just any egg, the amniotic egg, protected by a shell, carrying its own water, a tiny sealed sea inside of it. A portable oceans so life could leave the actual sea behind. This was the final break. No longer tied to water for reproduction, these early amniotes could spread deeper into dry lands, higher into hills, further from their ancient cradle. They were no longer visitors to land. They were citizens. Pause. Let your mind drift to a scene, a quiet forest before dawn. Mist rising from moss. The ground littered with shed bark and footprints. A small creature no larger than a squirrel steps softly over a log. Its body is warm now, not cold like its ancestors. Its legs are tucked beneath it, giving it height-speed balance. Its eyes are large, alert. It watches the trees. And when it moves like something that belongs here. This is not a fish remembering the sea. This is a walker. And walking this miracle born in the shadows of a lost sea has become a way of life. The fossil record tells this story not in words, but in layers. Coal beds formed from the ancient trees, crushed and compacted over millions of years. Trackways preserved in hardened mud. Skeletons curled beside fossilized ferns. It is all still there beneath the foundations of our cities, beneath the mountains and the mines. Beneath your feet, the earth keeps its books. We are simply learning how to read them. And here in the Carboniferous, the book begins to open wide. We see diversity explode. Reptiles emerge from amphibians. Some stay small. Others grow scales, claws, teeth like daggers. Tetrapods of all kinds begin to dominate the landscape. They are no longer hesitant, no longer awkward. They leap, they chase, they climb. And in their limbs, still jointed, still bent just so, we see the blueprint held firm. The same bones reused, repurposed infinite variations of a single solution. The humerus, the radius, the ulna, the wrist, the digits. Over and over the earth repeats itself. And in every creature that walked, ran, flew, we glimpse a ghost of the ones that crawled. Now, step back for a moment, not in time, but in perspective. The story we've followed of fins turning to fingers of air, invading lungs of creatures crawling from one world into another. This is not just a biological tale. It's a cosmic one, because movement is not just locomotion. It is destiny. Every muscle that twitches, every toe that touches earth is part of a much older longing, a call toward freedom. And in the Carboniferous, that call echoed like never before. The air was thick and heavy, sweetened by plant life in overdrive. Oxygen reached nearly 35% of the atmosphere, almost half again what it is today. And with it, life expanded. Insects grew monstrous. Dragonflies the size of hawks. Millipedes longer than a child is tall. And amid this alien canopy, vertebrates pushed forward into complexity, into competition. The walkers began to split. Some remained small, close to the earth, hugging the wet, leaf-littered floor. Others rose higher, stood taller. Their limbs grew stronger. Their backs arched into predatory grace. From the first amniotes, those brave bearers of shelled eggs, two great lineages formed. One would become the mammals. The other, the reptiles. And from the reptiles, a third would emerge, the birds. Each with their own answers to the same ancient question: how do you move through the world? Some chose speed, others stealth. Some moved only at night, some not at all, preferring ambush. But the limbs, the four familiar limbs remained. Upper arm, lower arm, wrist, digits, leg, knee, ankle, toes, different sizes, different gaits. but always the same core rhythm, as if life had found a beat it could not forget. And in the bones, we begin to see elegance. Some joints became ball and socket capable of rotation. Others hinges perfect for leaping. Some digits shortened. Others lengthened to become hooves, paws, wings, hands. The blueprint laid down in the mud of the Devonian was now being painted in color. This was not merely evolution. It was art. In the Permian, a dry and difficult age that followed the lushness of the Carboniferous life had to adapt once more. Forests gave way to scrubland, swamps dried, the air thinned, but the walkers endured. One group in particular, the synapsids, stood out. They were not reptiles, not quite. Their skulls had a single temporal opening behind the eye, a detail perhaps, but one that would set the stage for everything to come. They were warm-blooded, more efficient. They cared for their young. They had whiskers. And in their limbs, still grounded in the old tetrapod structure, we see the roots of mammals. One synapsid, Dimetrodon, with its iconic sailback and toothy grin, was long mistaken for a dinosaur. But it was not. It was closer to us. Its feet, its shoulders, its spine, they whisper forward through time. A murmur that would become wolf-elephant child. But then, the earth cracked. The Permian extinction swept across the globe. Volcanoes poured poison into the sky. Oceans turned to acid. Rainforests vanished. And almost all of life disappeared. Over 90% of species gone. A silence fell. But not forever. Because some walkers remained. Some held on in burrows, in shade, in the thin poisoned air. And when the earth began to heal, those survivors emerged to fill the world again. Among them, the ancestors of dinosaurs. Among them, the ancestors of mammals. Among them, the pulse that began long ago with a breath of air and a trembling step. The world remade itself in fire and ash. And from the silence that followed, a new rhythm rose. The Mesozoic era, the age of reptiles, arrived not as a beginning, but as a second act. And in this act, walking became something titanic. Because now the walkers were no longer small, no longer uncertain. They were dinosaurs. And they walked with confidence, with weight, with thunder in their stride. Look down at your foot. Feel the arch, the heel, the balance. Now imagine it scaled up 5 tons, 10. Imagine each step shaping the land, shaking trees, sending ripples through ancient lakes. This was the age when legs no longer just carried life, they defined it. Some creatures rose on 2 legs, nimble, swift, with long tails for balance. Raptors, early birds, masters of the chase. Others sprawled wide with columnar limbs like tree trunks, the sauropods. Their necks stretched toward the canopy, their feet shaped like elephants, yet wider, still left craters in the soft ground. Their bones, hollowed to reduce weight, still held the echo of the old tetrapod plan. Shoulder, elbow, wrist, digits. The same bones, scaled, reinforced, reimagined, and yet familiar. Even flight, that most transcendent escape from the burden of the earth, was born from walking. From arms stretched into wings, from hands grown feathers, from a lineage that began in mud. Archaeopteryx, with its claws, its teeth, its feathered wings, was not a bird in the modern sense. But it was walking the edge of something new. It could leap, glide, maybe even flap awkwardly through fern-shadowed skies. And in its skeleton, we see the blending of worlds again, the sea-born bones that now sought the clouds. The dinosaurs ruled for over 160 million years. For perspective, that's 40 times the length of recorded human history. They walked on all continents, from polar forests to desert dunes. And in their diversity, from the armored ankylosaurus to the sprinting ornithomimus to the tyrant lizard kings themselves, we witness movement refined, legs adapted not just for motion, but for elegance, for speed, for power. Yet the bones were still speaking the same old language. Over and over, life rephrased the same sentence. How do we move forward when the world keeps changing beneath us? Then, the sky broke open. A rock 6 miles wide fell from space. In an instant, the age of thunderous steps ended. The forests burned. The skies darkened. The oceans acidified. And once again, the world was silenced. But not all footsteps ceased. Some of the smallest creatures, those who had hidden beneath leaves and roots, survived. Mammals, tiny furred, warm-blooded. Quiet in a world that had favored size, their steps were soft, but persistent. And they carried forward the inheritance of everything that had come before. The world had burned, and from its ashes the quiet ones emerged. Small, warm, alert. Their nights were spent in shadows, their days in burrows or thickets. But their limbs were ready, because these were mammals descendants of the synapsid survivors of the dark. And their bones too remembered the past. The same four-limbed blueprint, but now adapted for nuance, for variation, for invention. Some crawled, some climbed, some took to the trees, others dug tunnels through the earth. Movement was no longer just survival. It was strategy. Step softly now, and you might hear the rustle of ancient rodents under a forest canopy. Their limbs light, nimble, carrying them swiftly through root and shadow. In the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, as the world warmed and forests spread, mammals diversified like never before. Hooves, paws, flippers, wings, all drawn from the same ancestral sketch. A bat's wing, it's a hand. A dolphin's flipper, also a hand. Your own, a continuation. 5 fingers, even if fused, flattened, extended, or hidden still there. Still tracing the line back to the ones who walked first. And then a shift. Among the many mammalian lineages, one group began to rise on 2 legs. First tentatively, then with purpose. These were the primates. Not rulers. Not yet. But seekers. Their arms shortened, their hips widened, their feet arched, their spines curved. They stood and found that the world looked different from that height. Their hands freed from walking became instruments, not of balance, but of creation. Tools, fire, language. The footsteps of these beings were not the largest, not the fastest, but they left marks not only in the earth, but in time itself. And so we arrive at ourselves. Homo sapien. The walkers who wandered farther than any creature before. Across grasslands, through mountains, over deserts, across oceans. We walk not just with legs, but with questions. We walk toward meaning. And in our bones, our hips, our knees, our spine, we still carry the story of our becoming. The aches in your joints, the curve of your back, remnants, adaptations, costs of a posture that once gave us sight over tall grass and hands free to shape the future. Now picture it you, at dawn, walking slowly across sand. Your footprints sink, then vanish in the tide. You turn, you see no one behind you. But they're there, all of them. The fish with lungs, the crawler in the mud, the reptile with the egg, the creature with fur, the one who stood. Their footsteps are yours. We walk, not because we must, but because something deep within us, older than language, older than thought, remembers how. Not just how to move, but how to become. To place one foot in front of the other, even when the destination is unclear, this is the most ancient ritual we know. And maybe that's why walking feels holy. Even now in cities on pavement, through fields up quiet staircases in the middle of the night, it feels like returning. Returning not to a place, but to a memory in our marrow. A memory not of one moment, but of millions. A memory of risk, of breath, of trembling limbs pressing into mud because staying still meant extinction. Is it any wonder we feel different when we walk? As if the world slows, and thoughts stretch into shapes we can finally hold. It is not coincidence. It is inheritance. You were built to move across land, to trace unseen paths, to leave footprints not only in soil, but in time. Every culture, every era, every continent has known walking as more than locomotion. Pilgrimage, wandering, pacing. We walk to grieve, to pray, to think, to change. When the mind is burdened, the body moves. When the heart is heavy, the feet lead. Because walking remembers something we do not always know how to say. That motion is emotion. That change is not just forward, but inward. We are not the only creatures who walk. But we may be the only ones who find poetry in it. Who can stare at a fossilized footprint and feel longing, wonder, kinship. We look at those ancient tracks in Polish limestone, those drag marks in Canadian shale, those imprints pressed into cliffs that haven't seen water in eons, and something stirs. Not because we remember the moment, but because the moment lives inside us, in the way our feet grip the ground, in the way our balance shifts, in the rhythm of our stride, a language before words, still fluent in the body. Sometimes I wonder how many of our ancestors fell. How many reached too far from the water and never returned. How many bones turned to dust with no one to find them. How many experiments failed and failed until something finally held. The miracle is not that walking evolved. The miracle is that it kept going, that the thread was never broken. That across extinctions, collisions, droughts, and floods, the steps continued. From reef to riverbed, to swamp, to grassland, to forest trail, to gravel path to you. Now, walking home beneath a sky your ancestors never dreamed of. Pause here. Feel the weight of your own body. The soles of your feet pressing gently into the earth, the tilt of your hips, the quiet intelligence in your knees, the small constant corrections your muscles make without thought. None of it is accidental. None of it is new. It is built upon billions of years of mistakes, adjustments, survival. You are not walking alone. You are walking on top of every trial that evolution dared to test and did not erase. This balance, this rhythm, is a record, a tribute, a quiet symphony composed by fish that gasped for air, by reptiles that laid their eggs in dry soil, by small mammals trembling in ancient ferns. Every step you take is the end of one story and the beginning of another. We often wonder what makes us human. Is it our language, our tools, our art, our memory? Perhaps it's simpler. Perhaps it's this, that we keep moving. Even when we are afraid, even when we are alone, even when the ground shifts beneath us and the sky offers no comfort. We move forward. We stand. We walk. Not perfectly, not always with grace, but with intent, with a pull that comes from somewhere beneath thought. As if our very cells know that stillness was never an option. Somewhere in you, there is a sea. Still, dark, ancient. It holds no name. No creatures remain in its waters. but from it, your story began. And though the ocean receded, though the tides left your lungs and gave you breath instead of gills that sea never left, you carry it forward, in your blood, in your eyes, in your hunger for the horizon. You carry it in your walk. And so we ask, where are you going? Not just today, not just tomorrow, but across lifetimes. Are you moving toward comfort or curiosity? Are your footsteps heavy with past weight or light with becoming? Is the rhythm inside you still aligned with the earth? Do you remember that? Long before you had thoughts, you had limbs, and long before you had purpose, you had motion, that before you had a name, you had a direction forward. Always forward. So here you are, in a quiet room, listening, breathing, still. And yet somewhere inside you, the story continues. A pulse, a shift, a slow remembering. You child of the land, descendant of ocean's bearer of borrowed limbs. You were never meant to stay still. Even in rest, your body dreams of motion. Even in silence, your bones whisper the old rhythm, that slow press of flesh into mud, that first heave of breath, that first trembling step in a world without footprints. Close your eyes now. Imagine a shoreline, empty, vast, timeless. The sea stretches out behind you, full of voices you no longer understand. The land rises ahead, unknown, unshaped. You take one step, then another, and somewhere beneath stone, not yet formed, the earth records it. Not in sound, not in sight, but in memory. And long, long after your body is gone, after your cities have vanished, after your names are dust, that memory remains. A single step pressed into time. The earth, as always, will remember. The earth has buried more stories than we've ever told. But here, we listen and we dig. If you felt the tremor of ancient footsteps, there are countless more waiting. Subscribe to the Lost World Files for the secrets Earth tried to forget. New discoveries, hidden epochs, the forgotten architects of life as we know it. Hit subscribe and walk further into the silence beneath time.